You ever notice how some generations get talked about nonstop, and some barely get mentioned at all? Boomers get blamed for everything. Millennials get analyzed to death. Gen Z gets treated like a brand new experiment. But there's this whole generation sitting quietly in the middle. Not trending, not shouting, not asking for attention. Generation X. Born roughly between the mid-60s and early 80s. They're your older co-workers who don't overshare, the parents who don't hover, the people who helped build the modern world and then stepped back without asking for applause. And here's the part most people miss. Gen X might be the most psychologically complex generation alive, not because they're mysterious, but because they were shaped in a moment of history that forced them to grow up early and trust very little. Let's rewind for a second. Imagine being a kid in the late 70s or early 80s. You come home from school, the house is empty, no parent, no phone to text, no camera watching the front door, no adult checking in. You grab a snack, do your homework, figure things out on your own, and wait. For millions of kids, this wasn't unusual. It was normal. Generation X became the first massive wave of latchkey kids, and that experience quietly rewired how their brains work. Because when no one's around, you learn fast. Choices have consequences. Mistakes don't come with a safety net, and no one's coming to rescue you right away. That kind of childhood builds independence, but it also builds something else, a constant awareness that you're on your own. Now add this layer on top. Gen X grew up hearing adults talk about stability, about loyalty, about playing by the rules. Then they watched those rules collapse in real time. Divorce rates exploded, careers vanished overnight, companies laid people off after decades of family values. They learned early that promises don't always hold, so instead of blind optimism, Gen X developed something quieter. Call it realism. Call it guarded hope. Call it expecting the floor to drop while still moving forward. Anyway, they don't assume things will go wrong. They just prepare for the possibility. And that mindset stuck. It also explains something people constantly misunderstand about them. Their silence. Gen X isn't loud online. They don't document every meal. They don't announce every feeling. That's not because they don't get technology. They helped create the digital world. They just learned early that privacy equals safety. When they messed up as kids, it didn't live forever. It stayed in a few memories, a few people's heads, and then faded. So broadcasting your life to strangers doesn't feel empowering to them. It feels exposed. To Gen X, being unseen isn't weakness. It's protection. You can also hear their psychology in their humor. Dry, ironic, detached just enough. Humor became armor. If you laugh first, nothing can hurt you as deeply. And that makes sense when you remember the world they grew up in. Cold War drills, nuclear threats discussed casually. Adults acting like disaster was always one button away, while telling kids not to worry about it. When you grow up holding two conflicting truths at once, everything might end and act normal anyway, you learn emotional distance, not coldness, distance. Now let's talk about work, because this is where Gen X quietly stands out. They don't brag about hustle. They don't brand themselves. They don't post motivational quotes. They just work. Their first jobs came early and came raw. Paper routes before sunrise, fast food registers without calculators, manual labor that taught accountability fast. These jobs weren't about passion. They were about responsibility. And Gen X watched. Their parents get burned by loyalty. So they didn't become loyal to companies. They became loyal to competence. If the system collapses, they want to know they can still function. That's why so many Gen Xers have backup plans, side skills, multiple income streams, not because they love risk, because they've seen what happens when stability disappears. Here's the paradox at the center of Gen X psychology. They're incredibly independent and quietly dependable. They won't ask for help. They'll struggle privately. They'll figure it out themselves. But if you need help, they show up. No announcement, no credit, no post about how good they are. That comes from growing up leaning on friends instead of adults, from learning loyalty through shared survival, not obligation. Their relationship with authority is just as complex. They don't respect titles. They respect skill. If you know what you're doing, they'll follow you anywhere. If you don't, no amount of hierarchy will save you, because they watched authority figures fail repeatedly. Political scandals, corporate collapses, public crises mishandled. Gen X learned to question power without needing to shout about it. Economically, they've been hit again and again. Dot-com crash, financial crisis, recessions stacked back to back. Every time they gained momentum, the ground shifted. So they adapted, not with optimism, with preparedness, and emotionally, that constant self-reliance comes at a cost. They're great in emergencies, calm under pressure, capable when things fall apart, but they struggle to lean on others because asking for help feels like failure, not logically, emotionally. Their relationship with knowledge was shaped differently too. Before instant answers, information had weight. You searched for it, worked for it, earned it. That effort made learning stick. They learned by fixing things, by trying, by failing. A broken bike wasn't a problem to outsource. It was a puzzle to solve. And that built confidence, not in systems, but in themselves. Now they're watching the next generation grow up. Constant supervision, constant visibility, constant documentation. They gave their kids what they never had, attention. But sometimes they worry, because in their world, visibility meant vulnerability, and solitude meant strength. Here's the truth. Generation X isn't better than anyone else. They're not worse either. They're different. They grew up between worlds, after the old one cracked, before the new one fully formed. They're the bridge generation, and bridges don't demand attention. They just hold weight, quietly, reliably, without applause. And maybe that's the most Gen X trait of all, not needing to be noticed, to know you matter. If this hit home for you, consider subscribing. And if you want to support more deep dives like this, hit the join button to become a channel member. I genuinely appreciate you watching.